Chapter 3 Profitability Part 4. And this will be the last part of this Chapter 3. And today I will talk about the space productivity and inventory productivity. If you can remember what you learned the last time, we talked about productivity related to human resource. So you learn how to calculate the productivity depending on the selling cost and also based on the hours people work and also full-time equivalent and so on. And today you will learn how to calculate this productivity based on the size of the store and also based on the inventory. So let's go ahead and start from the space productivity. The most common measure of space productivity is gonna be sales per square foot of the selling space. So you kind of want to know how much sales you made based on the size of that store and based on these square foot. Then you can kind of make a plan for the next year based on this space productivity. And sales per square foot is used to monitor the productivity of a department or a store, because you really want to know, depending on the different store in the different place, you kind of want to monitor this productivity. And space productivity can be used in planning sales and determining the space needed for a merchandise category, because based on this space productivity you got from the previous year or like from the previous data, you can make a plan how much space you need or how you can make a plan to put the merchandise in this space based on this space productivity. So let's talk about this sales per square foot as a productivity measure. So generally calculated, it can be generally calculated for a total store and for individual department, and it can be calculated weekly or annually. So based on the sales that you made for the weekly, annually, you can all calculate the sales per square foot. So what you have to know for that is gonna be gross space and selling space. This is based on gross space or selling space. And when you talk about this gross space, that means the all of square footage in the store, including the non-selling areas. So as we talk about this gross and net, so when you talk about this gross, that means that it even include non-selling area. And when you talk about this selling space, that's gonna be the total floor space devoted to selling activity. So it's like a main selling space. So you have to know about this concept. And when you talk about this sales per square foot of gross space, then you have to use that, the space, square feet of space in the store, that gross space. And also you can calculate sales per square foot of selling space. So you can calculate either sales per square foot of gross space or sales per square foot of selling space. So gross space includes both selling and non-selling place, and you can calculate it for based on the selling space. So the formula for sales per square foot of gross space is gonna be, you also, of course, you have to know the net sales to calculate this productivity. So that will be net sales divided by square feet of space in store, so that include all the space, and sales per square foot of selling space, net sales divided by square feet of the selling space, so where you really actively sell the product. So you will have to know this concept, and you can calculate this space productivity depending on these two concepts. All right, so let's look at the example. This question asks you, last year a store had sales of $23 million and like 994,000. And if it has 86,000 square feet of selling space, what were the store sales per square foot for last year? And this gave you the square feet of selling space. So you can calculate the productivity based on this selling space. So you want to calculate store sale per square foot for the last year. So what you can do, you can put total sales from the last year at the top and divide it by total square feet of selling space. So that will be 23,994,000 and 86,000. Then you will get $279. So that means that your sales per square foot, so each like square foot, that how much sales you made from this 1 square foot, that's gonna be $279. So now you learn how to calculate these sales, the productivity based on the selling space. Okay, and also you can calculate your amount of space if you know the sales volume and sales per square foot. Because previous slide you calculated the sales per square foot, and if you know the total sales volume, you can also calculate the amount of space that maybe you need it, right? So it can be used to estimate the amount of space needed to support a planned sales volume by using available sales per square foot data. So if you say know the sales volume and this average sales that you can make from the each square foot, then you can calculate the amount of space that you need. So here you go. So example 3.24, this asks you to calculate the amount of space that you need, right? So if the sales per square foot in the handbag department in a single unit of a chain store averages $280 annually, and the annual sales for a new department are planned at $252,000, then what amount of space should be allocated to the new department? Once again, if you think about this situation, that's gonna help you. So just think about that. You have this like the handbag department, and you want to have another like a new department to make certain sale. Now you know the annual sales from the previous department, then you can predict how much space you needed for the new department that you're gonna open. So this case, the sales space that you needed is gonna be which one divided by which one. So you have to think about the sales volume, which is 52,000, and divided by 280, because you're making the 280 per square foot in this case. So that's gonna be 900. So you can tell that you need 900 square feet to make these sales. 252,000 sales. If you want to make that, you need the space at least 900 square feet. So that help you. So this is really important to see how much productivity you have based on the space, but they gave you the idea. This give you the idea, right? So how you can make a plan for the space, amount of the space. So there's that. And also you can calculate the estimated sales if you know this like a square footage of the space that you have and the sales per square foot. So you calculate it, move things around. So now you can calculate this estimated sales based on the square footage of space and sales per square foot. So if you multiply these two, because that's the square footage of space, and if you wanna multiply that with the sales per square foot, because each square foot can make that much sales, so you have to multiply that with the actual space, then you can get this estimated sales. So that's gonna be used to estimate the sales for a store or the department, because you can estimate how much sales you can make based on the sales and the information from the sales per square foot. So here's the example. If 900 square feet of space in a new store has been allocated to the handbag department, so it already gave the space, right? So that's gonna be the size, and the average sales per square foot for this department in other units of the store is 280. Then what is gonna be the annual volume would be expected sales, right? So you can calculate this, right? So that will be, actually this is like a same question, but it's asking you the different one, right? Now I'm asking you to calculate the annual sales compared to the previous example, ask you to calculate the space that you needed. So in this case, to calculate the estimated sales, what you can do, you have to calculate, you have to put the total space that you have, multiply with the sales that you make from the one for per square feet. So that's gonna be amount of square footage multiplied with the sales per square foot. So that is 900 multiplied with the 280. So you can tell your estimated sales for the department based on this space size. That will be $252,000. So now you also learn how to calculate this estimated sale, because it's also important for you to predict the sales for the next year based on this space, based on the size of the store and this like a selling space. And we're going to talk about another concept based on this space productivity: sales per linear foot. This is related to the sales to the number of linear feet of the shelf space, this case. And that can be, used, lots of department and the places, they are going to have this like, the shelf. And so based on the shelf space, you can kind of calculate the average sales that you made based on this shelf space. And they can be used by many different ways for the department, merchandise category, or the brand. So you can kind of think about, which brand or vendor should be allotted additional shelf space. Maybe some of the brands sell better, or some of the vendor products, they're doing better. Then you can kind of like consider for the next year's, selling. You can kind of consider the certain brand to have more of these brands, products, and so on. So this sales per linear foot can tell you, which brands or vendor should be allotted additional shelf space. So let's look at the example. A store devoted 30 linear feet of shelving to hairspray. If sales per week for hairspray total $1,000 and $246, what are the sales per linear foot of the shelving? So it gave you that total linear feet of shelving. So that's 30, and now the total sales per that week for the spray, so which was $1,246. So now you can calculate how much sales you made by the each linear, foot of shelving. So you can kind of like get the average sales by the linear foot of shelving. So that's gonna be total sales, right? Divided by total linear feet of shelving. So that is dollar sale divided by the linear feet of shelving. 1246 divided by 30. So what do you get? 41.53. So $41.53 was sold. That amount was sold based on the one linear foot. So now you know the average sale. That's the productivity, right? That's a part of space productivity based on the shelf space. Okay. Now we're gonna talk about inventory. So now you learned about the productivity based on the human resources and also based on the space. And at this time, we're going to talk about productivity based on the inventory. So common method of measuring this inventory productivity can include the stock turnover, gross margin, and gross margin return on inventory. And first, about that, stock turnover, that's gonna be something, that's total net sales divided by the average inventory. So if you have a higher number of this stock turnover, that means that your floor is, repeatedly changed with the new stock and so on. So it's telling you that how quickly your floor is selling the amount of your inventory, like the product you have. So higher the number that you have for this stock turnover means that you have to replenish your store, the floor with the new stock more often. And your gross margin, we already talked about it in the previous chapter. So it's the difference between the net sales and cost of merchandise sold, and they will provide another basic measure of inventory productivity. And this stock turnover can be discussed more in the later chapter, more in details. And another one for checking this inventory productivity is gonna be gross margin return on inventory. So it's also called as a GMROI, so GMROI, that can be calculated by dividing the dollar gross margin by the average inventory at cost, is stated as a ratio. And gross margin return on inventory best serves as a tool for measuring the productivity of individual product categories. So there is a formula to calculate this, and I'll tell you what that means, right? So GMROI is gonna be, you have to know the gross margin dollar and average inventory at cost. So how much inventory that you have. So if you have a higher number of GMROI, then you have more return on your, the gross margin. So if you have a certain number of this inventory, like if you invest like a $1 amount, and if you have a GMROI of 2, that means that if you invest $1 amount, you will get $2 amount for the gross margin. So if you have a higher number, if you have a 10, that means that if you invest like $1 for the inventory, you will get like a $10 gross margin with your $1 investment and your inventory. So now you got the concept, and I want you to practice the example here. So example number 3.27. So this example asks you to calculate the GMROI from the following data. So net sales is $550,110, and gross margin is 38%, and average inventory at cost is $66,180. So based on this information, you can calculate the GMROI. But before you do that, you have to calculate your gross margin, right? Okay. In this case, it tells you the percentage. So it's a little bit different. You don't have the cost of goods sold, but you have the percentage, right? So you can calculate this gross margin percentage. Gross margin dollar, if you know this gross margin percentage and net sale. So it's the same as also you learned this in the first part of this chapter, and you can calculate your gross margin dollar based on net sales and gross margin percent. So they will be $550,110 multiplied with the 38%. Then your gross margin is $209,041.80. So that means that this after you deduct your cost of goods sold, right? So you got this gross margin dollar. So 38% of your net sales, determined as a gross margin. And if you know this gross margin dollar, now you can calculate the GMROI. Because GMROI can be calculated based on the gross margin dollar and average inventory at cost. Because this number is given up there, average inventory at cost as $66,180. And now you also know the gross margin dollar. So that will be $209,041.80 divided by $66,180. Then you can practice that, and you will get this 3.16. So what does this mean? So that means that you will get the $3.16, gross margin dollar if you invest like a dollar amount of the inventory. So once again, if you have like higher number, that means that you have more return on your gross margin. So that's that. So now you also learn how to calculate your productivity based on the inventory. And once again, we're gonna talk more about this stock turnover later, but you also learn this GMROI and other way to calculate its productivity based on also inventory, but also based on the space and based on the human resources. So let's just summarize and wrap up this. So in this chapter, you learn the relationship of basic factor of that, the profit and loss statement, and you also learn the basic profit factors details and performance measures. And based on this performance measure, you learn all this productivity, how to calculate it: human resource productivity, space productivity, and inventory productivity. And we're gonna talk about more the details about the cost of goods sold the next time, and that's it for chapter 3. So hope you all got everything clearly, and that's it for chapter 3, and I will see you the next time for chapter 4.